So for the sake of conversation, let's assume that there are two kinds of people, and let's label them positive and negative, and let's avoid all possible connotation and only run off the assumption that these two kinds of people are, in some sense, opposite, counter forces. And every individual person is predominantly one of those two, which is not to say that they are not also in part their opposite, because they are, and in a given context they would appear to be more like their supposed opposite. Because that's all contextual. But let's just assume there's two kinds of people, and a person naturally is like a well, a spring of their own particular type of energy, whether that's positive or negative. They produce a lot of that kind of energy. Or rather, they produce a lot of energy which in itself has neither negative nor positive qualities, but when passed through the filter of personhood or individuality or personality, perhaps, it becomes either positive or negative. But we, as individuals, are constantly producing this energy that is then transferred into this form. And so, when two people meet, they interact. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, meaning that both people who meet and require an equal and opposite reaction. Which is to say that for every individual who pushes, there must be an individual who receives or pulls, maybe. And for every individual who receives or pulls, there has to be an individual who pushes. Or gives might be another word for pushes. Gives and receives, perhaps. And this back and forth flow of these two types of energies is what is the equilibrium. That's how reality, how the energy of the universe is. We won't even go that deep. That's how two people maintain positive interactions, right? So the funny thing is that everything that an individual does is in some way the use of its energy. And there are certain things, like use of certain narcotics or prescription drugs or alcohol or sex or exercise, anything used to an extreme in truth, but more so these things seem to have a strong pull on the energy centers of any person. And the use of these drains the available energy for that individual to translate into their positive or negative contribution. Push or pull, give or take, give or receive contribution. And so when two people try to form a relationship, which is a symbiotic orbit, which is a counterbalanced stasis of personality, of give and receive energy trading, whatever you want to call that. There's a million ways you could talk about it if you understand what I'm saying. And so if one person is not giving enough, say the negative person is not giving enough of the negative energy to the positive person, and the positive person is not receiving the appropriate amount of negative energy, which it needs, because for anything to be on one end is to spin out of control. So we're all trying to achieve balance. We achieve balance by aiding one another. Right? So if a person was all this positive energy, that'd be like spinning in circles. It'd be like only port thrusters, you know. We're just walking around with our big toes missing in circles. Okay, so we need the other energy because we haven't figured out how to have it on our own, or because life would have no game to it, perhaps. Someone once said perhaps that we were supposed to escape from that, but life also wouldn't be any fun if everything was always so still. So we need that energy, and two people engage with one another in a way to live life as we define it and be balanced. It's some might call that a crutch. I call it a dance. And so this balancing occurs where if two people who are positive and negatively charged are expending their energy upon one another, say in sex or in any other devotional practice, doing things for each other, you know, cooking for each other, whatever it is, but there's no, if the energy doesn't transfer, if positive doesn't receive negative and negative doesn't receive positive, if it doesn't flow, if there's some kind of block there, or it's just not being given in the first place, then this depletion via consumptive pleasures like sex and whatnot will bring the energy down without it being filled back up. And so that creates this kind of frustration. When you're low energy, you're very angsty and angry and frustrated. And so there's this give and take that needs to occur. It's like, if it doesn't occur, there's a breakdown. When it does occur, when there's a balance between the negative and the positive, then there's like this nearly infinite amplifying capacity. Like, once they're equal to each other, they can raise their frequency. It's almost like when two people get into balance with one another, they bring out the best in each other. Once we can help each other get level flight, if you will, then we can interact with one another in such a way as to psychologically or spiritually or somehow like set each other free in the sense to become our higher selves, or however you want to say that. There's an opportunity to develop that is not as easily attained individually. And I think this is like the basis of what marriage was once about. You know, two people would, in vowing to be true to one another in the wholest sense, that is a promise to always be trying to develop oneself enough to aid in the development of the other, because they have to develop to understand you, so that this mutual smooth orbit thing can happen, right? That is a profound kind of dedication, much further than just promising you won't, you know, sleep with other people or anything like that. And the reason you wouldn't sleep with other people is because if I deplete my energy on other people and I come home and I have to play this role, which is to say I have to have the energy input to keep this stasis going, and I have just depleted myself because I was giving it to some other celestial body, then I'm going to throw things out of whack, and that's not good for me either, because now it's going to cause disharmony in this wobble energetically. Like, we don't even think about it socially. It's just we're just talking about it's a matter of energy. It's perhaps just a metaphor, but in fact, undoubtedly a metaphor. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, so always a metaphor. But there's like this thing that has to happen. Like, each kind of person comes into contact with each other person because they are in some way drawn to the nature of the other, to the energy of the other, to the personality of the other. And we fill each other that way, and can fill each other that way if we're willing to give the energy and receive the energy, because we need it, and that's why we're there. But if I think any selection of thoughts that have nothing to do with this, then I could talk myself out of getting energy because out of spite or resentment or fear. Fear. Mm-hmm. And if I were to do that, that's just as bad as sleeping with someone. It's just as bad as wasting energy on something. Fear and doubt and insecurity will surely suck up energy just as quick as any affair would. And so we have socially, which is to say inter-human and inter-non-human, we have a responsibility to keep our own personal and individual energies up, to have a good deal of respect for that characteristic of ourselves, because it is our responsibility. It is what we are to the rest of the world. And that is the last thing that we can neglect, because if we neglect that, then we neglect the world, because the world is what we experience and the world experiences us. It's a two-way, it's a mirror. It's one and the same. Though difficult to recognize sometimes. One and the same. And so figure out how you are opposite to every person that you meet. And I don't mean different, I mean opposite. Figure out who you are that is the opposite to the person you're meeting. And do not push yourself on the person, but be yourself for the person, with the person. Because who you are is exactly what the people you meet need. And remember that we're all looking for that steady wobble. We're all going after stasis. And so it'd be okay to let stasis be a spiraling fractal. It's uncertain. You never know where your energy is needed, but it's needed.